Hey, it's Trevor Grant from Revenue Hub. Today we're joined by Jagdish Sandhu, CEO of Frozen Lime Asia. In this video, we're taking a look at the current challenges facing the Asian hotel market. We explore the traveler buying motives and how this can be used to build confidence, which will hopefully lead to increased demand and bookings. We also discuss the different travel drivers for an Asian customer when compared to a European or US traveler. We dig into how these differences might affect domestic and regional travel within Asia, but also the potential impact on Asian travelers internationally. Now, you will see on the video timeline it is broken into chapters. This means you can either watch it from start to finish, or you can scroll along to pick the areas of most interest to you. And finally, if you're keen to hear more from thought leaders in the hotel and travel sector, then please subscribe to the channel, click that bell so you know when we have new content. And if you like what we're doing, please give a thumbs up as it really helps the channel. Anyway, hope you enjoy it. Roll the intro. Hi, Jag. How are things with you? Great to see you again. You well?
Good. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you for having me all the way from Singapore.
You're welcome. Lovely to have you from Singapore. Now, for those watching who may and listening, because we put it out as a podcast as well, they may not necessarily know you or know Frozen Lime. So professional etiquette to kind of hand it over to you for a couple of moments to tell us all about you and your company. So if I can pass over to you for a few minutes, that would be great.
Sure. Thanks, Trevor. So Frozen Lime Asia was set up in 2016, and we basically we work with independent hotels in the space here of Asia Pacific that are focusing on revenue, distribution, sales, and marketing. So we're all about the synergy of making all those four functionalities work cohesively and to optimize the solution. Now, given my background, for the last 20 years in revenue and distribution, has made me realize that there is so much need for these areas, even as an outsourced solution. So with the remote services that we provide independent hotels, this gives them an opportunity to be able to get skilled resource at affordable prices.
Yeah, that's a key part. And you've had a really interesting background. I mean, you've been hotel side. Just tell us, just give us a little bit of an insight into those 20 years.
Yeah, sure. I know. giving without giving the age away, right? I started my career actually in the operations background in front office, and just wanted to always learn what made a hotel tick. And along that journey, I also went to departments like sales and marketing, where I got to experience the sales outfit of it, but not only that, but in the catering side of it, how all those departments come together to really make that hotel function. And I ended up going into reservations. And that's where I realized that it was really the heartbeat of the hotel. But I had a very different interest in reservations. I was really interested about the distribution platforms, and I was really interested about how we could get the guests to pay more. So it was like a natural transition into revenue management.
I was going to say, you're on the path already.
Didn't even know it was happening, and as it happened, and suddenly this world opened up. And in Asia, at that time, it was still a very new subject of expertise. So I spent a lot of time learning, researching, getting guidance, from head offices at that time with the branded products that I was in, and developed that skill set and got to experience not only room revenue management, but in food and beverage, as well as in catering revenue management. So it gave a very good spectrum and ability to see what was more. And then the love of pricing began. The background of understanding what economic triggers are there that, makes you think about when to price accordingly to the right customer at the right time, suddenly became my oyster. So, so that's how I ended up in revenue management.
And you've held some senior roles. I mean, you've moved not only moved your way from reservations into revenue, but moved up the ladder very successfully too.
Yes, thanks, Trevor. Yeah, I did get to experience some very senior roles in some companies, and it was an amazing experience because I not only got to see it from an individual hotel aspect. I got to see it from a cluster and as well a region, and to in some of my roles at a global level. And it also gave me the spectrum of not only looking at whether it be a hotel management contract hotel, or whether it be a franchise model, but even into the levels of, where owners independently running their hotel. So it gives you a very broad spectrum of understanding the different relevancies to different stakeholders.
Yeah. And I think that's key. And there's obviously a reason we've got you on here. And we're going to be talking about sort of the specifically around the Asia-Pac region and the buying motives and what's the current situation. And I guess in a way, we're really looking to tap into your depth of knowledge of the region. Could you give us an overview of what the Asia-Pac region is like right currently at this moment? What are we experiencing? What are you seeing in different countries and impacts?
Sure. So just going back to when COVID hit us, which was just post the Chinese New Year, or at the Chinese New Year period, which was in January, I think Asia took the first wave or the first hit of it, of where we saw, businesses and borders start to close down, and where travel suddenly became a standstill, literally in an overnight phase. And that prolonged through the couple of months that we saw. But at the same time as that was happening, many countries also took away the domestic travel aspect. Everything even shut down to that level. So overnight, a lot of hotels went from some occupancy to no occupancy. And that prolonged period happened. And the reality for a lot of the properties within Asia was that it was a bit of a wait and see to whether or not the gateway would open up in several weeks or in several months. And in the worst case scenario, everybody referred it to SARS, right? The situation or what happened in SARS. And on SARS situation, it was between 2 to 3 months that we started to see market impacts open up. However, unfortunately, with the COVID situation, it's been a lot more prolonged, and borders stayed closed a lot longer than that. And it became a global situation where it wasn't just the Asia traveler impacted, it became every traveler impacted. And as we see the easings that have happened with some of the Southeast Asian countries, it's still very much in a controlled environment. So majority of countries have only allowed some domestic travel to happen, and within that domestic travel, it's still pretty restricted, meaning that in some countries the hotels are not allowed to open facilities. So there are restricted areas of movement. But in some countries, we are seeing that bounce back already happen, where the facilities are coming back. So the domestic traveler is now able to enjoy what else is available to them. Given said this, though, Asia Pacific has always been a region that has been dependent to the global traveler. And it's not just about the domestic traveler, it's also about the regional traveler and the international traveler that comes within the region. And so that has always been the primary piece of the pie. So it is very challenging for a lot of the Asian countries to just be able to survive on domestic travel. And how much longer is this going to be prolonged before we can start to see some regional travel come back, and then hopefully all the international travel come back?
Yeah, it's very challenging. And as you say, we're not only looking domestic, regional, international, but also back to your point about different facilities, because those facilities generate additional revenues. And, if you're restricted in terms of who can come, if you're restricted in terms of what you can open, it makes it a very challenging period, doesn't it?
It definitely does, because just give yourself a thought here. Like if you or me were going to go on a trip, would you specifically just go on a trip to be able to sleep in a hotel bed and have that shower? Unlikely, right?
Not me.
It's all about that total experience. You're going to want to be able to have that dining experience. You're going to be able to want to go to attractions, and if attractions and if facilities are not open, not just within the hotel, but even outside, or you're going to have a lot of controlled movement where literally you'll have to check in every 10 minutes or so on your phone to be able to be anywhere. That would definitely hinder a traveler from making that decision to actually get on a plane and go somewhere right now. And we won't even get into the complications of getting on an airplane right now. So
that just adds another layer, doesn't it?
Totally. The waiting game in airports, the whole travel experience now, it's not about having that relaxing vacation. It's about the stress induced and the fact that, oh, am I going to be safe, right? Even getting on that plane and sharing that cabin air with someone, and then getting to the hotel, and is this hotel clean enough? There's so many layers involved that are going to play with um, the mind of the traveler, that, it's going to be difficult for every hotelier to be able to tick off every box per se.
That's a good point, and that's exactly going to lean into what we want to talk about around some of the buying motives and what kind of phase we're in at the moment. Just before we move to that, quick thing I'm interested to know. There was always this, I think, number of months ago. Don't drop your pricing, don't be discounting. What are you seeing? And it's a very broad, general question, I know, because it can be different from country to country depending on restrictions. Are people generally holding up? Is there a resistance to be dropping pricing or thinking more smartly about how they may be discounting, or are you starting to see this anxiety build and so prices starting to come down a bit more dramatically?
I mean, generally, there has been a drop in price, but it hasn't been a significant drop. I would say that it's still a very comfortable margin of hold.
Yeah.
But the challenge comes into how long that can be sustainable for the property, right? And you're going to start to see more decisions be made for cash flow management and cost flow through, versus it just being the profitable margins, right? Because salaries have to be paid, suppliers have to be paid, etc. So I would say that it wouldn't be just specific to a region or a country, but I think it really comes down to that individual property and how that matrix is made out of, right? It's a very challenging factor to say from a revenue management standpoint. We believe that, okay, yes, we shouldn't drop our pricing, but the relevant question here is, even if you drop your pricing, is the customer going to buy? I think the factors are that right now for revenue management, we have to get out of our comfort zone and address the fact that it's not just about the pricing, but we're going to have to factor in the customer relationship building as a key priority in our revenue management strategy. And we're going to have to build stronger relationships and more convincing powers that have got to take place in those strategies versus just using a price technique or a discount technique. So I think that shift is inevitable.
And that leads us nicely into some of the elements we want to discuss through today as well, because, and again, I refer back to your introduction, but because you don't look at things from just a pricing point of view, I know you are very passionate about this, about understanding where people are in their buying motives and how you're influencing that. And I know the psychology behind these elements are a big factor that you try to bring when you're working with your hotels, not just looking at what is your price point, but what is your strategy? How are you engaging? How are you communicating? And so I think in terms of when we're looking at buying motives, where do you think we are on the scale in terms of, are we back to where we're driving demand, or are we still in the phase where we're looking to connect with that potential traveler, build the confidence, create the need, which will ultimately lead to the demand? I mean, you spoke a lot just a few moments ago about people feeling safe, and always makes me think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs in our decision making and buying motive. What are your kind of thoughts as to what you feel where we are in that situation as regards to the Asia market at the moment?
Yeah, so just coming back to the key pillar in Frozen Lime and the synergy of revenue distribution and sales and marketing. Our fundamental practice is really looking at it this way. Revenue management is like the brain. That's where all the thinking happens. Distributions and sales are your arms and legs. That's how you get your mobility and you get yourself out there. And marketing is the heart. Basically that's the organ that's going to make you feel all those emotions. The softness of everything that is aspect and me connecting to my consumer. The reality, just like the human body, you need all these elements for your body to function. And the same thing happens that when a customer interacts with us or a customer decides to stay with us, all these fundamentals are happening at the same time. So you've got to make the whole connection work. And
Makes
it's
sense.
almost impossible for us to hide the fact that we have to create that connection, right? Coming back to your question about the stimulating of demand, can we stimulate demand right now? Honestly, we have very little control over that factor at the moment, right? Even though we can stimulate it, it doesn't mean that somebody is able to get on a plane or feel safe enough on that plane,
Yep.
right? Before they can get to us and then making them feel that way in the hotel. So what's really important is for us to focus on that key elements of that safety part. So coming back to the topic of Maslow's hierarchy, which we all love, there is a very clear transition between the different generations and how the buying behavior happens, right? If we look at the baby boomer era, the physiological needs and the safety needs were, top priority. The baby boomers focused a lot on that. And as we come closer to Generation Z, we start to see that they're on the top part of the hierarchy. They're really about the self-love, and they're really about the esteem and the actualization part of it. So that's really where they live. And so the components for them that relates is also the touch feel sensation, right? So even though you have these very different generational gaps of how that buying behavior may be, it's still very important for the safety aspect to be there in place.
Yep.
And here again, I would tie it back to building that customer relationship, because when we're communicating something to you, is it just going to be triggered by just seeing a slash of price? Or is it suddenly going to become important to see, what practices is this hotel taking? How am I going to be safe in my space? Is there social distancing practices being held in the different facilities of the hotel, so that I know that if I'm on vacation, or if I'm taking a break, or a staycation, like we like to call it here in Singapore, is you have a weekend getaway. You want to make sure that you're not going to be challenged by those safety aspects of the health aspects as well.
Yep.
So it's really prevalent that we have to have that in the messaging of it. So it's not just coming down to a price or the stimulating of the demand, but that connection that we've got to make. And where this opportunity lies is in our marketing abilities, and we cannot ignore the power of social media today. There's nothing wrong in us trying to promote and to be able to um, uh, facilitate or to be able to converse with our customers about how we are making them safer within our hotels. So I encourage hotels to actually, why not have a video clip on your social media pages showing how it is that you're taking care of these extra steps, the ramped up cleaning that may be taking in place, or the additional safety measures, where there are less touch points or interactions with certain staff, and they are maybe in the digital form. There's nothing wrong with communicating all this and putting it out there. And relevant enough to say this, that even now in the online travel agent platforms, all the bigger players are already starting to have these pages on each hotel,
shift, haven't you?
Yeah, so you're starting to see it already. So you cannot ignore it. So it's really important for us to get this verbiage right and to be able to communicate this correctly. So whether it's a guest calling us on, on the phone, whether it's communicating to us online, whether they are going to be sending us an email, it's really important for us to recap this and assure the customer that we are doing everything we can. Now, if we are able to convince you, Trevor, that you are going to be safe in our hotel, does the price suddenly become an important factor to you?
No.
Most likely not, right? So this is where we have to understand that the psychology of buying is just not related to a dollar sign.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think just picking up on your different generational point as well, that yes, as we move towards the from the baby boomers to the Gen Z, they maybe become more esteem orientated, and how when they're sharing where they're on holiday on their various social media platforms is kind of gaining that, looking for that respect from others, or reflecting their look how well I'm doing element. Do you sense, when you're working with your clients and looking at their different segmentation and looking at their, what their business mix is, would you be anticipating different approaches for different generations based on those buying motives?
Yes, we definitely do take a look at that because there is a demographic of a clientele that may be more prevalent in a given hotel,
Hmm.
right? And the reality here is that also we've got to be aware of, just not this generational aspect, but the cultural aspect as well.
Hmm.
You're going to definitely see with certain societies, there's going to be a very intrinsic play on how that safety is going to be provided to them and how it's communicated.
Right.
Take, for example, in the Asian culture, whether or not you're a baby boomer, even if you're in the social media era generation where everything is Instagrammable, that safety element is also Instagrammable. It
Yeah,
can be if we do it correctly.
that's a good point.
Why not look at it in that aspect, where a baby boomer may post it to say, that I had a stress-free holiday knowing that I'm well taken care of at this hotel, while the younger generation may be posting on the social media as like, look at, me experiencing how the hotel is actually taking care of us during this time. So there are two aspects of it, and both of them reach the same message.
Yeah.
But I think here then it becomes cultural, because the reality is that in each culture there's going to be different acceptance level of what should be shared and what should not be shared, and
Hmm.
how should that be portrayed.
Hmm.
But if the realism of it, it still comes down to that key part of hierarchy, level two, safety is a big component. It just plays out in different ways for this generation.
Yeah, and I think you're right, because at the end of the day, the first level on my Maslow, that physiological, we've
Yeah.
if we're thinking about going on holiday, then that's already taken care of. Otherwise, we probably
Yes.
wouldn't be thinking about going away if we weren't secure at home and we didn't
Yes.
have the finances. We're not going to be thinking of a holiday. But yeah, you're right. That next phase is the safety piece, and I think what I find quite interesting, and just picking up on your point there about how it's shareable, and how that message is communicated. But I think the part that also is tied into that is to ensuring that the hotel actually then lives up to and fulfills its promise. I mean, if you don't deliver on your safety
Yes, on your
protocol,
promise. Yes.
that that review will go out and I know people are worried, what happens if hotels don't do what they say.
Yeah.
But in the world of reviews nowadays, that's going to get out pretty quickly if people don't deliver on it.
Oh, definitely. I mean, it can be very deadly. I mean, social media can be your worst nightmare at the same time, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But the realism of it, Trevor, is that these problems were there before,
Hmm.
before our pre-COVID situation, and the question comes down to is that how the hotels have been dealing with that situation, and hopefully with the COVID realization of what's happening is that they are addressing those base points of it.
Hmm.
And I totally agree with you. If we're going to do something on social media, we're going to say something on social media, we got to live it through.
Yeah.
These days, we live in a 3-second society, and everything can be a video and it could be a picture. So that the damage can be something that is irreversible. But the reality of it is that when it comes down to our fundamental practice of our strategies that we are building, and we're talking about in the terms of revenue management or in pricing specific,
Hmm.
I get asked the question a lot, what's the correlation?
Yeah.
The correlation is all the way of living through it and delivering what is needed, even to the aspect of, that logo not being there
Yeah.
anymore. That's
Yeah.
prevalent.
Yeah.
It's irrelevant whether that was pre-COVID or during COVID or post-COVID.
That's a
We
good
should
point.
be
We should be
actually
still
making sure
cleaning.
that these are, that these basics are being taken care of. And technology has become so rampant that these days you've got all these incredible units that where you can ultravioletly clean the rooms, infrared clean the rooms, and you've got all these different type of mobility devices and all that. But the question here is that, is it needed?
Hmm.
Or do we go back to basics and keep things simple and make sure that things that we're able to carry through in the process of our cleaning, where we are seeing that even in some hotels where decisions are being made that, perhaps we don't occupy the room every day. We allow the room to be aired out. We allow the room to be thoroughly cleaned. And this, of course, goes back to the individual property and what they are putting in practice,
Yeah.
and then how they are then sharing that with the client. To me, you should share that with your customer,
Absolutely.
because you are also taking a financial hit by having that room empty, given where there may be limited demand. But there is still a financial impact to that, and you're making a conscious decision to make a customer safe. So you should share that. You should be able to vocalize that. And not everything is, of course, social media ready, right?
No.
But there are other ways to communicate that. Make sure that your hotel websites have a dedicated page for your health and safety.
I think that's really key, to have a dedicated page for it.
Yes, that you have the information available and people can refer to it, and you can even segment it out to put it, that what is the extra care needed, related to whether it be families or elderly that are coming to your hotel, etc. How are you particularly taking care of these particular segments of customers is also important. Now, the thing is that everybody's going through this for the first time. So there's a lot of test bid and trial. There's nothing wrong with also stating that to the customer, that we are trialing this process, or we are putting this process in place, to be able to experiment to see if this keeps our customers extra safe. There's nothing wrong with that, because that's what the whole world is doing right now. It's a trial and error process. But the more you communicate this, the more the customer is going to be engaged and will allow you to be able to go through these motions. And there's going to be a safety and security blanket there, that knowing that the hotel is taking the necessary steps for this. So to me, that equals out to what the price you're going to charge in these days, right?
Yep. Yeah. And I think you're right. And it comes back, at no point are we talking about how are we discounting the price? How are we putting together packages? How are we reducing what someone's going to pay? And in a way, you're using back to this Maslow's, one of the foundation values.
Yes.
We're actually using our policies as a key sales tool and a key differentiator to communicate to that potential traveler that they will be safe and to come and choose our hotel. Because if someone is going to book, they are going to be evaluating between a number of different properties. If someone was to land on 3 hotel websites, and there were 3 hotels that were maybe priced at 10-15% less than hotel number 4, but hotel number 4 had a very clearly communicated cleaning protocol, strategy, and the advantages to why that would be helping the guest to stay safe. How much that price aspect, assuming other elements were equal, facilities, similar location, it'd be interesting to wonder how much the fact that it would be 10 or 15% cheaper in the other hotels would sway against, but I might have been prepared to pay that money anyhow, but at least I'm going to feel safe there. What are your... I mean, it's a hypothetical scenario.
Yes, it's a hypothetical. Yeah, I think a majority of people will probably go for hotel number 4 because that safety element also supports level 1 of the Maslow's hierarchy, which is the physiological needs, right? That's put in place, and you know what's going to happen, and it's something within a controlled environment. Now, there are going to be risk-taker travelers. We know that in any situation, even when there's political turmoil, there's always that risk taker who will travel during that because, they want that slash of price, etc., and they're going to do that. But that segment of customer is a very limited segment of customer. It's not sufficient enough to be able to drive high volumes into every property. And that customer is definitely not a loyal customer either.
Yeah.
So the question here is that, as when you're reassessing your loyalty aspects with your customers, these are going to be prevalent. I'm sure every loyalty program globally for any major brand is having dedicated spaces for this to make sure their loyal customers are feeling that safety. There's no way for you around that. The health and safety requirements are something not to be disregarded in any way, right? So I think it's going to be a prevalent factor, right? So the obvious choice is number 4. The question here is that if the difference is so minimal, is it really going to impact a difference in change? And even if the difference is significant, I would probably think that customer will probably end up not even traveling because there is a strain of budget on them for that travel, right? Because we're seeing a shrinkage of economies. We're seeing where holidays are going to become now something of, I remember in the 80s, it was you look forward to that once in a 3-year trip
It was
kind of
that luxury,
situation,
wasn't it? It's
right?
like,
That
well,
luxury,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. So you're going to kind of see that come back for a while as
Hmm.
well
Hmm.
before everything goes back to somewhat of a normalcy where you've got more air, planes in the air, etc.
Yeah.
So it's going to become a bit of a novelty. And when there is novelty with travel, there's definitely going to be a lot more evaluation being taken by the traveler.
Hmm.
So the safety will definitely be one of them, and that 15% won't matter.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. And the reason I kind of emphasize it is because I think it's trying to position, and the reason why we're mentioning Maslow's hierarchy of needs is not to be looking at cleanliness and this safety element as a procedural
Yes,
aspect. So it's not
totally.
something as a hotel we have to do as a
Yeah,
procedure. It's really embedding and understanding how critical it is to the actual buying motive and buying decision of
yeah,
that individual you're trying to capture. So to try and elevate this when you're looking at it above and beyond just what do we have to do to be able to comply, and shift the almost turn the telescope round and say, well, what do we have to do and how do we use our procedures and our ability to comply in actually to help to pull demand towards us and connect and build that relationship with the potential traveler.
totally. It's going to become a need factor.
Hmm.
It's going to sit right there. In some ways, if we're specifically talking about the Maslow hierarchy, in a way, the level 1 and level 2 will merge in somewhere to
Yeah.
become even more glued on each other. The factor, because it becomes part of the need element. And for us to go back to the level where that public health and safety is not going to be as of a priority is a very long shout away.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the other things that I try to highlight to the hotels that we work with is that, it's not about when the pre-COVID and the post-COVID. The period of COVID is going to be a significant long period. So
Hmm.
we have to ride that wave and we have to understand what it's going to take for us to evolve through this. And so you have to address it whether you like it or not. You have to get on that bandwagon and address that need. So I would suggest that hotels look at their pricing not only as the pricing elements of a slashing of their discount values, etc., but more, have you put in place these needs?
Yes.
Having the health and safety communication clearly indicated on their websites, on their distribution channels, and on their packaging as well.
Yeah,
There's
absolutely.
nothing wrong with having a care package, to help a consumer while they are traveling, whether it be from wet wipes to help them out when they're out and about, or for a mobile phone for them to use when they're in the city where it gets wiped down, etc. So there are so many ways to address this. It's
Hmm.
it's not that it's not a one cookie cutter fix all method really
Yeah.
in place, I would say. Yeah, so it's going to be interesting how as a industry we're going to have to change some of this belief and practices that we have, and perhaps relearn some new things. A lot of us have gone back to basics, because looking at trends and analysis, there has been no data available, or there is no system that could have predicted how this is going to pan out. So we've gone back to the drawing board. So why not everything else go back to
Go
the
back to the
drawing board
drawing board too.
and work it from there. Yeah,
That makes sense. And I've
yeah,
I've heard you talk before, and it was quite fascinating. And I want to dig into this a little bit in a moment. But you've mentioned how culturally um, the Asian culture towards travel, when comparing that against kind of European and US. Can you just very briefly kind of indicate and just share how the culture around travel is to me seemed very very different when I look at it and say, well, I'm going away for my week long 10-day holiday,
yes,
few little visits. But you were saying, oh, that's very different. Can you just
yes,
explain those
yes.
differences?
So a typical Asian traveler usually takes 3 to 5 holidays a year. I
So,
know it's
so
a
rather
little
than
bit
my
quick.
one for 10 days or something, if I'm lucky enough.
Yeah, but given said that your 110 days, one trip in for an Asian traveler would usually be about 3 days, three to
Okay, so
five
it's a
days
similar number of
is the reg.
maybe days, but
Yeah,
shorter trips
shorter.
more often.
Yeah,
Right.
yes, and that's most likely also because of the accessibility regionally and the affordability regionally, right?
Hmm.
There are a lot of deals available, ever since the introduction of budget travel, and having those options available to us. The Asian traveler has, kind of skewed or changed that how they travel, by taking shorter trips and then probably doing one which is slightly longer to 7 days or 10 days for that matter, but that would be a long haul travel then. So regionally, it would always be a shorter haul. Whereas with the European and American traveler, most of them would focus on taking a much longer vacation. And actually, I should say that the Pacific's in there too. I mean, the Australasia,
Hmm.
Australians are also the same way where they take a longer holiday and they could probably also, how they do destinations is also very different. The European American traveler will go to one destination and probably stay there for 3 to 5 days and relax on the beach and sometimes even do nothing.
Yeah.
Whereas an Asian traveler is also known, for trying to get as many sites and attractions in during that stay that they're going to be there for the 3 days. And that usually influences the decision of why they're going to a trip. It's never just to be able to go and sit on the beach. There's always an exponential, 3 or 7 things that they would want to do. And if they're not able to take majority of that off, they're likely not to travel on that trip. Whereas with the European traveler, it's really, about the, winding down and, potentially sitting on the beach. Yeah, you would still do some attractions, but it wouldn't be as intense as the Asian
So
traveler.
so the driver then for the travel, as you say, it's more from the Asian traveler perspective. It's more about either there may be a theme around their travel, or it may be so it might be more thematic, or it might be more experiential. It's about
Yes.
going, doing, seeing, capturing,
Eating.
eating,
Eating.
eating, uh, and they would rather have 4 or 5 3-day trips purposefully selected for those
Yes.
experiences rather than, as you say, maybe more US or European, or as you say, Australasia region, where it may be that holiday you look forward to the winding down, where
Yes.
you may go and see a few sites, but more of it is about trying to relax and unwind rather than go and do lots of sightseeing for or visiting. Is that
Yes,
my
it's
I've
very
understood that
yes,
correctly?
it's very very prevalent to the Asian traveler, and of course generationally we're seeing some changes happen, right? As the younger generation with the Instagrammable moments, they want to make sure they get those in as well,
Hmm.
whether it be Western or Asian. But there is still a intrinsic behavior pattern of how these travelers culturally travel as well,
So then,
and making those decisions.
so then, tying that back into this kind of overarching discussion we're having. So we've got regulation restrictions. We've got Maslow's kind of our psychological needs that we're making
Yes.
decisions about whether we travel. Plus, then we have cultural differences. So for the for the Asian region, which is what the focus of this discussion is about, you've got a number of countries in that region. How do these factors kind of overlay? I mean, if we look at it from a domestic point of view, I mean, I read something recently that I think it came out to say, well, Singapore just cannot cope with if it has to survive on the domestic market. So it looks almost like a perfect storm in a number of different ways. I mean, how are you seeing that playing out? What do you see as some of the challenges or maybe opportunities that might exist
Uh,
if we start
Definitely.
domestically to start with?
Yeah, definitely for a country like Singapore being a very small island, And just having the weekend getaway for the domestic market, that's definitely not sufficient to be able to fill all the hotels. And even attractions for that matter, right? Predominantly a lot of it that's been built in Singapore has been for international tourism, with the integrated resorts to the global attractions that are in place, and even to the sophistication of how the hotel industry is here. And if we travel across the region and we go down, look at Thailand and Indonesia and Vietnam, etc., you can see that prevalently most of the industry has been designed to cater to the international market. The international market has always been a major player. If we had to look at the pie, it's probably 60% of the pie. Wow. And then maybe 30% would be regional travel, and then maybe 10% would be domestic. And maybe for some hotels that may be a little bit bigger, it may be 15, and shrinkage, vice versa.
So you're almost having to invert that and switch it the other way around.
Yes, right. Totally. But there isn't enough domestic travel to be able to fill all these beautiful hotels and resorts. So the dependence of regional travel will be, it's undeniable. We have to have the regional travel come back for the Southeast Asia region to be able to survive. And so that cross borders is going to be a very important thing. And a lot of the countries are discussing about border regulation and how to be able to have these open corridors for people to travel back and forth, etc., whether it be for business or pleasure. But the regional travel needs to happen in order for the tourism industry in this part of the world to be able to survive.
Yeah.
And prolongedly, we need that international traveler to come back as well. The dependency on the European business during the Christmas, New Year period has always been prevalent.
Yes.
That's not going away.
No.
We've seen some pattern changes over the last few years as to how even the European traveler has also kind of changed their pattern, where they may be splitting it to 2 holidays in one, going to 2 different locations in one, even for that matter. But it's still a very prevalent part of the pie. So you cannot ignore that, and it's very, very much needed. The other aspect of it is that if we talk about domestic travel, a lot of the countries within Southeast Asia are countries that are economically getting more sound and improving in their spending ability. So you're starting to see the middle income be able to come out and be able to spend, but they're not going to be able to spend in that necessarily the luxury sector of the travel business.
Right.
So there is a dependency there, again, going back to the international traveler. So I'd like to call it glocal these days. There's no way for you to survive without anybody's business. I mean, you've got a lot of foreigners that are living in Asia and vice versa. You've got a lot of Asians living internationally in the European countries. And that travel is also very important for the region. But border controls, again, regional has to take place in order for any sustainability to happen. And I think even there's been quite a lot of statistics coming out of Europe that are showing that those borders have to open in order for them to survive too. So
I think, again, just picking up on your point as well, and this is what struck me when you were talking about the cultural differences, because if I look at Europe, if my going on holiday is to go and sit by a beach or in a hotel by a pool because I want to read a book and unwind, then if those air tunnels are established between warmer climates, I can go and do that. And that would, assuming all those other elements we spoke about, those safety needs and my ability to travel and feel okay, if we take for granted that they're in place and I can go and travel, that would suit me. But if we're then coming back to the Asian culture around travel and approach to travel, I'm not looking to go and unwind. So those air tunnels might be opened up, or the borders might be opened up, but then the hotel, the destination, is still reliant on having attractions that are open and accessible that will draw the Asian traveler with back either domestically or probably thinking more here regionally to come to travel to you. Because if, from what you said earlier, if I understand it right, if they're not open, then there's no interest for them to want to travel. Is that fair? Or
unless there's something absolutely spectacular about that hotel that is going to be revolutionary for me, for my experience, and that I'm going to be able to engulf it during my stay there, then I'm likely not to travel, right? So you're going to need those elements and those add-ons to be able to complete the traveler's need.
Yeah.
Let's say, for example, hypothetically speaking, if you were going on a trip and your trip was completely to spend your vacation at Universal Studios,
Yeah.
and if Universal Studios was closed, would you still make that trip?
No.
Most likely not. But if your intention was that you just wanted to go and lie on a beach, and irrelevant, it could be a shack, you would still go.
Yeah.
It all comes down to really what is that traveler's number one interest of why they are traveling, right? And then that questions back to that: if my safety is going to be affected, is this something that I can put off?
Yeah.
Right? And probably wait till a later date. So I think we're in that conundrum of that questioning that's going to happen culturally, and as well as internationally, because it will play in everybody's mind. One of the areas that I always talk about related to this is when we talk about family travel and senior travel, right? The senior market is something that we cannot ignore. There is a whole industry that supports on it. The cruise business has been totally successful in that area. And then when we talk about family travel as well, right? These two segments are going to be very, very particular about the safety elements, right? And whether or not these are going to be met. Irrelevant if there's going to be 10 things on the list that they're going to be able to cover in their travel, the safety is going to be up there because they are the most critical that in the exposure rate of what we have facing in COVID. But given said that, then even to the independent traveler, who's traveling on business, now you're traveling for your company, but is your own health also a priority? Right? So the factors are there. So even though culturally you may have that element that you may want to tick off these few things, you cannot ignore the safety part of it. So you're going to have to do that hand in hand in a way.
Yeah, it's still going to be there.
Yeah.
That's an absolute given now. Whereas before it was expected, now there's a heightened awareness around it, isn't there?
Yes, yeah. So some of the things that we are seeing also come out is that, if you take a look at it and see more studies coming out, I mean, it's not something new to the market. It has been in development for a quite number of years, but it's become rampant now with the whole COVID, is virtual travel, right? So we are also seeing it from an eco standpoint, how it's actually better and more sustainable, whether it be for animals or for the rainforest, etc., to have the virtual travel experience. Of course, you're not able to feel and touch and smell, but I'm sure scientifically we'll get there too very soon. But if you are able to receive this box kit in your house and be able to experience this in your own home, and yet the safety element of you is totally secure, would you not consider that option, right? Versus putting yourself in that risk spaces. So I think we're going to be seeing some of these also come into play about how the virtual travel is going to become more impactful. We've seen also, with attractions, I believe it, there were quite a number of the museums worldwide that actually showed their exhibits
virtual tours,
for free for virtual tours, and that was, it had really outstanding response. And it's amazing, somebody who had never seen the Guggenheim now could see the Guggenheim, right? And you didn't even have to get on a plane for it, and you still could do it in the safety of your home. So perhaps that appeal may be there for more people. And so I think we have to embrace the fact that our travel landscape or tourism landscape now has another dimension that we have to also acknowledge, right? So, for example, for hotels, we are encouraging our hotels now virtual site inspections, be able to show your customers what they're going to be experiencing. How is that going to be, the experience of them as they arrive into the hotel, what to expect, etc.
So
to
mostly
be able
like
to
a
go through
video
that
or
whole process. Yes. And it could easily be done as a pre-arrival kit to the customer so they know exactly, and take advantage of getting in that auxiliary revenue of booking their transfers in, because it's going to be the safest way for them to travel. So the more checkpoints that you have to secure that journey of the customer, and you're going to be able to meet their needs, meet their cultural behavior, etc., it all comes into play and together, and you embrace that all as one.
I think that's a very interesting looking at how you can the ancillary services that maybe had been offered, but now because you can build an element of security and safety and control around it, that
Totally,
maybe is
yeah.
now even more prevalent and a great opportunity to drive that.
Yeah, if you remember, Trevor, a few years ago when women started becoming more of the business travel segments. Hotels used to have the ladies' floors.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And made sure there were certain amenities, etc. So really, it's just look at it like a segmentation that this is a customer need and requirement now that you have to have these added touch points related to that. What's stopping us from being able to put this in place for our consumer today?
Yeah, brilliant. It's always interesting to talk with you. but no, we do, and I, whenever we've had conversations in the past, we could talk for hours.
Yes, we can.
But you have such a broad view and such a rounded view of each element and touch point. It's not just, yes, I've been in revenue management, so it's revenue management. You really look at the whole. It's a very customer centric revenue management piece.
Yes. I mean, we can't ignore that today. The reality is that it is all about the customer journey, and the customer value, right? The total customer value permutations that we have, that we've got to figure out exactly what's going to happen through that journey.
Yeah.
And if we're able to do those checkpoints, the customer is likely to have the best experience possible. And so because you're also factoring in what could go wrong.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of the times we've missed that out as we are preparing in our strategies, etc. We're not piecing all those elements together, and it's really prevalent that we do that now.
No, I think that's a great point, and probably a great final point to end our conversation. I'm very conscious of your time. I'm conscious it's the evening where you are in Singapore as well, so that's even more appreciated that you find the time to talk with us. Not much more I can say. Always love hearing your thoughts and insights. It's been a pleasure to have you join us today. Thank you
so much, Trevor. Thank you so much for having me on Revenue Hub, and I really hope that we'll have more conversations like this.
I'm determined that we will. you take care.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.